Everyone, it's 11:05 and I have taught classes and attended enough seminars in my life to know that we should get going on time. So first of all, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes and then we're going to dive into a discussion here, and we should have time at the end for everyone to join the conversation. But first, I am going to attempt to share a screen with you just to give you, while I give you a little context for what we're going to be doing. There we go, with this panel. So again, hello everyone. I want to thank Jason Ellis and everyone at CUNY City Tech for hosting this conference, and of course all of you for attending it, especially right now when I know for a lot of us it's getting towards the end of our quarters and semesters and there's a lot of balls in the air. I hope this is a good palate refresh for you before you return to your everyday activities. So as you all know, I'm Professor Lisa Yaszek. I'm a Regents Professor of Science Fiction Studies at Georgia Tech. And I'm probably best known for my work on the history of women in science fiction. And I do both work on the recovery of women in science fiction who've been sort of marginalized or erased from history, and the discovery of new voices across the world as well. And that's what led to my current work as an editor for the Library of America. So the Library of America, as you may or may not know, is a nonprofit American institution that's dedicated to preserving and disseminating the best of American letters across eras and genres. In other words, it's a taste-making institution that really shapes the kinds of access that we have to the American literary archive in general, and increasingly to the science fiction archive as well, as the Library of America has taken on a number of science fiction editors like myself. Now, the first book that I did for the Library of America was called The Future is Female. And this is a book that celebrated the accomplishments of women writing in the science fiction community before the rise of a distinctly feminist science fiction in the 1960s and 70s. So what we were really interested in this book was celebrating women who wrote science fiction between 1920s and the 1960s. Right now, we're working on the sequel to this, which is called, cleverly enough, The Future is Female to the 1970s. And I'm really excited about this book because we get to take a deep dive this time into just one particular decade, right? The moment when feminist science fiction comes together as a sort of unique and discrete mode of storytelling. And in fact, what I'm going to do here now, while I quickly wrap up, is show you some of the cover art that we're looking at. I just got permission from my editor this morning to share the table of contents and the potential cover art with all of you here today. The work has been very collaborative at Library of America, and we would love to get your feedback on all of this as well, right? Okay, and so this gets us to the actual panel, right? So one thing that's really cool at the Library of America, like I said, is that we do a lot of the work collaboratively. Everyone gets in on reading stories, everyone weighs in, and it's been a really fun experience. One of the things we wanted to do with The Future is Female too is to make sure that, since we really want to get a lot of young people as well as traditional older science fiction readers looking at this anthology, we thought it would be really smart to get a group of really smart young women involved in this as well. And so, with the blessing of the Library of America and with funding from Georgia Tech's Ivan Allen College and Georgia Tech Center for the Study of Women, Science, and Technology, I was able to assemble this group of 4 young Wonder Women who are going to be talking to you for the next 15 or 20 minutes about their experience accessing the feminist archive. And so now I'm going to stop talking. And I'm going to put down the images. I can put these back up later for people who want to look at them. But right now, I want to turn it over to everyone at the round table and let them start talking. So team, it's great to see you here today. And I was wondering if you could get us started by telling everyone in the audience about who you are and how you got involved in this project.
Yeah, can you hear us okay? Okay, awesome. I guess we can just get on the line. Yeah. My name is Josie Benner. I'm a 4th-year biomedical engineer with a minor in science fiction. And I got involved in this project because I was in Dr. Yaszek's Women in Literature and Culture class. And in that class, we read a Joanna Russ story called When It Changed. And Lisa was very impressed by the comments I had to make in class. So she offered me a chance to do research and do this project.
Hi, my name is Edeliz Zuleta. I am also a 4th-year BME student. That's biomedical engineering, for people who don't know the tech lingo. and I'm also a minor in science fiction studies. I got involved with this after entering the lab, the sci-fi lab here at Georgia Tech with Lisa, and I initially started with the Sci-Fi Lab podcast, and then Lisa offered me this opportunity to hop on the book and do some reading, and I'm really grateful for that.
I'm Olivia Kiklica. I'm a fourth-year computational media major. I got involved with this project because I actually transferred to tech during the pandemic when everything was online, and I took Lisa's science fiction class, Intro to Science Fiction, and after working with her for a while, she offered me a position on this, and it was a great opportunity to get to know people because I didn't really know anybody at tech.
I'm Jessica. I'm a fifth-year computational media student. I got involved with this project because I also took Professor Yaszek's Intro to Science Fiction class, loved it, and wanted to figure out how I could continue to learn more about science fiction. And I also am an avid feminist, so this made sense. I was really excited about the project. And I also found, I read stories and also found a lot of the art that you see behind us. So.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, so all of the images behind here, right, as Jessica just mentioned, just so you know, are all things that the students have found in the course of the research. And this is something that we're hoping to add into this new Library of American volume, is to include some of this artwork. It's a great way to celebrate the fans as well as the professionals who were writing at that time, I think. So it's interesting that Olivia brings up that she started work, she transferred to tech in the pandemic. And so she was only really meeting people online because a lot of our work happened online. I'm not sure, had I met any of you? I don't think I'd met any of you prior to the pandemic. So when we actually were back face to face this year, it was really both very familiar and very odd all at once. So, but we're very used to talking to each other online. So this should be really easy. But one of the things that we've talked a little bit about amongst ourselves, I think be fun to share with people, is the actual process of accessing the science fiction archive. We were already online. We had to do all the research online. So it was sort of working out. But what was that like? Like, what did you learn about accessing the science fiction archive and about getting to old science fiction as we were doing this?
Looking at that, it's definitely, you know, as a child of the information age where almost everything is accessible when you need it immediately, it was really interesting to work with these stories that maybe we knew existed, but we didn't have direct access to unless Professor Yaszek was able to request them from another library and scan them for us. I personally went through the Internet Archive and I went through almost all of their compilations of science fiction to try and find stories that might fit our criteria. And that wasn't very easy. So it was interesting to see that it's kind of a testament to the only things that survive are the things that we think should survive. And I think that it's a good thing that we're going back and relooking at what we think should survive.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Olivia, and like backpacking off of what she was saying a little bit. I mean, you look at anytime like on BuzzFeed or just in the mainstream media on the internet that you're like best science fiction authors or like top 10 science fiction authors, it's always like a group of like old men who have not lived on this earth for like 50 plus years, right? So like before this project, a lot of times I don't think most people would even think about some of these women, and like some of these women are fantastic writers. I mean, Joanna Russ is a pretty big name, so are Octavia Butler and Ursula Le Guin, but people like Connie Wilkes or Vonda McIntyre are people who like I would not have heard of before this project, and they've turned out to be some of my favorite authors in science fiction. So like there's a lot going on that the mainstream media doesn't even realize, and that like we wouldn't even know to look for, or any average science fiction fan would even know to look for.
Yeah, what you said was really interesting about like not even knowing that it's there. I got really into lost media over the pandemic, and one of the theories of the internet is that like there's an infinite amount of lost media that like we had yet to find. And I think I was like, this is like what we're doing, and I think it's really important to like make it found media and make it public, because the way that you see yourself in these stories like from decades ago that you don't expect to see yourself. Sorry, that was a bit of a jumbled sentence, but like I think it's important to see how women and people can connect like across time.
Some of it can stay lost though, I think.
Yeah, some of it should stay lost.
All right. Well, maybe we should just follow up. Do we want to follow up on that right away about things that should stay lost and found? Maybe we want to jump to that question right now, just because it kind of came up. And then we can loop back to the feminist question here in a moment here, the bigger so what. So what were your favorite stories that you found, and what are things that you wish you had never found? Or images too, especially if there's been like imagery we've found. Because like you, I knew a lot of these people, and I knew a few more, like I knew Vonda McIntyre and Connie Willis, but then we found people like Eleanor Busby, who was so famous in her moment, the first woman to win a Hugo Award, and then wrote this amazing time travel story that I'm not going to say anything about if you haven't read it, but you guys all know it. Yeah, it was really exciting. But anyways, okay, maybe that was one of my favorite stories we found, was the Busby story. But what about you? What were some of your favorite stories you found, or things you never want to see again?
Daisy and the Sun.
Yes, that's our favorite.
Like everybody's favorite. Which, I mean, Connie Willis is a big name in science fiction, but you don't often see this story in any anthologies of her work, if at all. And this was actually one of the very first stories she published, was 1979, so the very end of the period we were looking at. And we liked it because it really hits that perfect mix of like science fiction, but also like mythology. It doesn't try to explain everything. And it's also a love story. So it kind of like appeals to the base human want for being understood.
Yeah, and it's like mind-blowing, but also very tender and also very like weird, which is really cool.
Yeah, the thing that stuck out to me about the story among like all the others is like it feels cinematic to
Yeah.
me. There's something so gorgeous about that story. I love it.
Yeah. It might be the way it stitches together the very personal and the very cosmic, right? I mean, without giving anything away, right? It sort of has a double novum, that a girl gets her first period at the exact same moment the sun goes nova. And it's not clear if there's ever any relationship about that or not, but then what happens after that? I mean, if you think about it, that's so crazy. What would happen after that moment? You have to read the story to find out. So what are stories that you hope that you never have to encounter again, that you would warn people away, that you think should stay lost and locked in the archive?
It's like Jessica answered.
Or were there any?
Yeah, so there was this one story we read by Lisa Taetle. It's called Stone Circle, and
Is this in there? Is that?
it's not.
No, it's not going in. You won. So you can talk. Go ahead. You lost on a couple others, but you won on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, well, so something I was going to say, and something that like I think has kind of shifted since we started this project, is I remember when we first started this project, there was a different story called the Screwfly Solution. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
By James Tiptree, that has a similar, like, is also kind of unnerving in the same way that Stone Circle is, but Stone Circle made me like that story a lot more. But anyway, going back to Stone Circle. So basically, the premise of Stone Circle is there's this girl who is basically on display, kind of like in a museum, and there's a lot of graphic depictions of like candidly like sexual like assault, like not consensual stuff there. And so I didn't read the whole story because I was like, this is too much. I gave it like, we had a scoring system and I gave it like a 1. I was like, no, I'm not doing this. But what's interesting about that story is there's it was one of the only like LGBT stories we found as well. So there was like, while at the same time understanding that like it did not age well because of those graphic depictions of sexual violence, versus weighing like the uniqueness of the story and like what it says about like the sexual revolution and things like that. Like those were things that we had to go through a lot of talking about and a lot of arguing. So, so yeah.
And even with that depiction of like the LGBT community, like it happens because there's like a young rebel who basically like needs a place to crash. And she basically like pretends to love this woman. And then the story like kind of takes a turn when like the girl opens her door and sees that this woman is like making out with a dude. So like it felt very much like a betrayal, if anything, to me, to the LGBT community, rather than like not that every story needs to be like a happy ending, and not that those kinds of stories would always have happy endings, especially in the 70s, but like it felt very much like a slap in the face to me, which is another reason why I didn't love it.
For me, I think I identify as the one who's like, if there's something brutal, I'm like, I love it, but like, or like, I see where we could spin this to where it's okay, but like, for this one, it's a lot harder for me. And I tried to read it again with like different eyes, and I can see the value of the brutality there. I think it's true. We spoke a lot about like the anger of feminism, and I think you can really see it there, but it's just like, I feel like it's too distant from how we could relate to it.
It walks a really fine line between relating trauma in a cathartic way and sort of reinscribing the trauma. And I think that's part of the power of the story. And as we've all talked about, right, Taetle came up with George R.R. Martin, and this feels like a very George R.R. Martin story in some ways. But yeah, it was an interesting and challenging one that felt very much of its time. But I think that where we were persuaded to drop it was mostly, and we cover a lot of these themes elsewhere. But it was one thing I think that I struggled with, and this is going to get us to our last question, which is about sort of, right, this project was cool to me. I want to sort of shift to the feminist question now, right? That this project was cool to me because like, it's really about like you young fourth wave feminists working with the third wave feminists to recover second wave feminist stories. And like you said, it's interesting. Sometimes we really saw ourselves in these stories. Sometimes we didn't, and sometimes there was no we there. Like it would be a generational fight or some other kind of fight we were having where we didn't always all see ourselves in the stories. And I think that was important and cool. So what I guess that's a question for me is what did you sort of get out of it in terms of feminism? Like, what did you find was like maybe the most surprising or shocking or appalling kind of, or I don't know, interesting thing you found over the course of working on the book?
Yeah, one of the most interesting things to me is like how many of these struggles like continue on today. Like, there are a couple stories, I think Wives, for example, is a big one, where like the aliens are agender, like they're not women and they're being pressured into being women, right? Which is something that we see a lot for the non-binary community today. And like across a lot of these stories, there are topics of things like consent and things like reproductive rights, which are all things that like we still struggle with today. So it was kind of interesting for me to see like how these things originated, and like it's a fight that is still going on in some ways. It's gotten better in some ways, but it's also still going on in some ways.
Yeah, I think that's what really stuck out to me is like, I would pass this off to a friend and I'd be like, tell me when someone wrote this. And she'd be like, 2017. And I'm like, no, this was written in the 70s. And she'd be like, are you serious? And I think in one way that's like, it might make you feel a little sad, like maybe we haven't done as much as we should have, but I think we're always trending toward a path of like good and better. And it's like, progress is never linear. But as I said before, like, as a person of color, there weren't many depictions of a person of color, right? And we got a couple in there, and I'm really happy about that. But like, I feel with like contemporary science fiction written by men, I usually never see like any parallels. But even though these were written by women like decades ago, and were like cis and white, like there's still a lot that I don't know. I was able to connect with, and it just made me feel like seen. And seen in a special way when you feel seen by someone who's no longer alive, who wrote something decades ago, maybe didn't even dream of someone like digging it up in 2021 to put it in a book.
I think that it's really interesting to me reading so much feminist science fiction is how overwhelmingly kind of tender these stories can be. Even though they can be gross and violent and evil, they can also be very, like you see how how do you say this? You see the emotional intelligence within them. And that's something I don't think that you see a lot with big name science fiction. Like one of my favorite authors is Isaac Asimov. I don't think you see that in his fiction a lot. Not at all. So I think that it's really important that we recognize that, you know, I think science fiction, a lot of times when people think of it, they think of it as something gritty and like not emotional and to the point, but you know, science is also about the human experience. And I think that these authors are really good at encapsulating that.
Yeah, and I would say, I think like for me, what I really gain from it is I think that like, I think it is like the tenderness and also just kind of the way they are willing to depict things that like I haven't seen before in like literature. Like one story that like I think is underrated, is View from a Height that's in this anthology. And like, I think I read that story during like the height of the pandemic, and that story is like all about isolation and like being isolated, like physically and like mentally and like emotionally. And it was just like, wow, like someone could have written this like yesterday, like someone already said. And I just think that like those types of stories aren't the types of stories that like are gonna aren't like the most like
Blockbusters.
yeah, blockbusters, like, but they're very emotionally charged and thrilling and connect with you on a deeper level. So
That's cool. And it's funny that you bring up A View from a Height, the Joan Vinge story, which was, I thought that was a cool story. And it was, again, that was a great example again of how people often, like we would sometimes come to stories with very different attitudes. I think Stone Circle was absolutely the big one where I was shocked that for all that there are similarities, and like we see that these women, the struggles that women identify in 1970s, many of us still feel today, but in some ways, some of our attitudes have changed and are very different. And like with the one thing we found was that a lot of the stories were very angry and very violent. And it makes sense, right? In part because this is the moment when feminists are allowed to express anger publicly. And it's also the moment when new wave science fiction authors are experimenting with sort of more shocking modes of narrative. And so it came together, but we tended to have surprisingly different attitudes about it. Like, I feel really bad. I feel so desensitized to violence compared to you guys. Like, you're like, wow, I'm really offended by this one. But you could articulate why some were offensive and some weren't. And to me, it was all just sort of undifferentiated, like violence for the sake of art and politics. But I learned a lot from that, and it was interesting. And we had these interesting arguments. And then sometimes also you guys just think of things that I wouldn't have thought of. This wasn't actually you, but I also had some other students who were reading the stories occasionally for extra credit, just so we could get a third thing. Like, everyone lived Daisy in the Sun. Every person of every race, gender, creed, color, species loved that story for sure. But it was funny, a couple people got really upset about the Joan Vinge story, View from a Height, because they said, but what's going to happen when she dies? That parrot's going to be stuck in space all by itself. And they were extraordinarily upset about the parrot. And I was like, wow, did any of you think about the parrot? I never thought about the parrot. But I had two people who were like, oh my gosh, the parrot.
Yeah, they live to be like 80 or 90 years old.
Yeah.
So like my sister loves birds. So I'm always thinking about like, if you get a parrot when you're like 40, it's gonna outlive you.
Yeah, right. I know. Well, hopefully we don't want to give away the rest of the story, but anyways, there's a surprising, weird lost storyline with the parrot there. But I think that's great. I love the idea of these stories having emotional intelligence. Like, what a great way to talk about them. And I think that's something, women have always been celebrated for bringing depth of characterization to science fiction. But I'm not sure that always comes with emotional intelligence. And I think that's maybe something we really start to see in the new wave, especially because people are doing interiority, I guess. So I think we got about 10 minutes left. This would be a great time to open this to the audience. If any of you have any questions, either for me or for our students, if you'd like to weigh in on any of the artwork you've seen here, if you'd like us to go to any images and show them to you, talk about any stories with you, we're happy to do that. All right. Yep, we've got it. One.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I'll go ahead and moderate. You want me to, are you guys reading the chat too? You can see them? Oh, you've got it right there, of course, absolutely. Okay, but I'll read it for the people who are listening and wandering around, as I sometimes do when I'm at these things. So Chris Leslie asks, I'm curious to know if the panelists have been inspired to write science fiction. Some of the best writers are, of course, people who are knowledgeable about STEM.
So,
and yeah.
I actually do have a story that I've written and I've been trying to get published, not successfully so far.
I read it and I love it, and I hope
It's quite
that
good.
it gets. I write science fiction. I always try to pull on my BME because I feel like there's so many cool things. Like, for example, in my engineering class the other day, he brought up nutrients patches, so microneedle patch put on the back of a bindi for women in India who are undernourished because they won't take supplements, but they will remember to put their bindi on. And it's just like, when he says things like that casually, he's like, oh yeah, that study's published 2 years. I was like, that sounds like science fiction. That's amazing. Like, why doesn't everybody know about this? So yeah, whenever I try to write, and none of my stuff is published, I keep it maybe one day. I want to incorporate these things that like are real in the here and now, and then like push them It reminds me of an author real quick. Neil Shusterman, his series Unwind is like based off of like really crazy stuff. But in the back, in the index, he has like papers and articles citing everything that sounds insane. And it's like it's happened before. So yeah.
For me, this has like dramatically changed my writing because I very much grew up on mostly male writers. Like the reason I got into science fiction was Ray Bradbury, which is like, for all it's worth, like it's got a lot of tender emotional moments, but they tend to be very like masculine. And he definitely doesn't fully understand women in a lot of his work. Like there's at one point he describes women like a clock, like they just keep on ticking and you're like, what? And I do love his work, but like for me reading this, it was like almost, it pushed me and it gave me an excuse to write something that was more emotional and write something that like felt more genuine to me and what I wanted to write. And it kind of showed me how to do that, which I really appreciated.
I'm personally not a writer, but I love everything that they do. Like they do great science fiction here. But yeah, similarly, I think that like just from like a viewpoint perspective, I think that like I didn't know this type of fiction and writing existed, and so maybe one day I'll like try my hand at it, but it's really cool that like it does exist and that we found it.
Yeah.
Oh, Lisa, you're muted.
I try to mute so I don't talk over you and then no one can hear me, right? Okay, yeah. So, okay, everyone's agreeing that Bradbury, yeah, well, Bradbury, tricky, especially because he got a little nutty at the end of his life, which I won't want that to taint his literary, legacy. And yeah, it's tough. So I see we have a question from Cara Kennedy. So it sounds like some of what you're discussing in terms of tenderness and emotional intelligence brings up the whole soft versus hard science fiction and the lingering of what science fiction is. I'm wondering if you all already have had a preference for what types of science fiction you liked and if that changed at all with this experience. Oh, that's a great question, Cara.
Yeah, I love hard science fiction. Like I want to understand every bit of how the nuclear reactor works and is powering the rocket. And then reading this, it like completely flipped things around for me. Because like Of Grass and Mist and Sand was one of our stories, and it's basically these like snakes that are like bioengineered to like cure things or do certain medical things, and you never find out how they work. But they do, like they literally, one of them bites this kid and his massive tumor goes away, right? And so that was much more of like I had to be like, okay, I can't know how this works, but the beauty of the story is not knowing. And it's like the cultural things that are surrounding this rather than the very hard science fiction there.
Yeah, so and we have an Excel sheet where we put our thoughts and stuff. And like, I swear half of my comments are like, as an engineer, I'd like to know X, Y, Z, but this was nice. And it really forced me to like, be more open to that. And it's weird because in fantasy, that's really explained. But when it's science, I'm like, where is it? Where is it? But like, it makes me, and after this project, like I tried to go back to like old series, like for example, Red Rising, and the fourth book, I think it's like Golden Age. And I was like, I can't do this because and it's very like emotionally heavy. But I was like missing what I've gotten used to having in female science fiction. Like I've literally only consumed female science fiction for the past 2 years. So going back to other stuff, I'm like, where is it? And now I want to find more contemporary stuff.
I've always been a kind of soft to medium science fiction girl. Like I think Doctor Who is what got me into it. Space operas like the original Star Wars, even though people like to pretend it's not Star Trek, the original series, there is so much emotional undercurrent to that just couldn't be explicitly said because it was 1965. But yeah, I think that's why I resonated with these stories so much.
Yeah, I would say I've always also been a big softie as well. I'm always like a huge fan of like the softer stuff, especially like Attachment, which is all like soft, which is basically a story of like 1800s. I can't remember, but like some 1800s gal was in the brain of like a modern day person and they like share thoughts. But anyway, I will say I think it kind of gave me more of the opposite reaction where I had more appreciation for the way in which hard science like can influence the soft science, and like Daisy and the Sun, for example, like with going into like the science of a nova during the whole thing. Like I was like, this is pretty cool.
What was that one story? We didn't even like talk about it that much. It was the one where the gas particles were sentient.
Oh,
Yes.
Oh,
Oh my God, it's on the tip of
But
my tongue.
that is the plot of a Star Trek episode.
Yeah.
But I remember,
Deaf listener, deaf
Deaf
listener.
and I remember reading that and being like, okay, this is a cool like concept, but one, Star Trek did it first. Two, it's not good. Like the author was literally just writing like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And I was like, but I don't care about what's happening.
You want to know how they feel.
Yeah.
I think there's too much. I think people like to draw too much of a hard line between hard and soft science fiction because I think any good
Yeah.
story, no matter like how technologically focused, has to make you care about what's happening.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I thought a number of our stories actually did a pretty good job with that. I mean, obviously, I think that the Vonda McIntyre is maybe the best, but even like Vinji's View from a Height, Sergeant's If I Ever I Should Leave You, like she has to really sort of think through both like the beats of a romance story and the beats of a time travel story to like put that one together. And I think that's kind of interesting. All right, so we have a few minutes left here and I'm gonna go, now people want you to talk about the present. So our first question, I'm going to take a question from Ida Yoshinaga and the one from Jake Adler. They're sort of two sides of the same coin. And please remember that some of you will be taking classes with Dr. Yoshinaga in the spring. So maybe this is like your interview with her, right? All right, so Dr. Yoshinaga wants to know, now that you have a sense of the modern history of women's science fiction, what types of feminist science fiction and fantasy narratives do you think we should see more of? What should be more told and distributed today across media? What gender narratives or images are you craving?
I want all women things, and I want like, because you see so many things and it's all men, like the men are all the main characters. And I don't want it to be like, I feel like Birds of Prey does this a little bit where it's like they wanted an all girls ensemble. Like I want it to feel like very natural and just like a bunch of women did this rather than, because a bunch of men just do stuff all the time and nobody asks any questions. But if a bunch of women do it, it's like, it's a political statement by the movies.
Yeah.
So like,
Why does it have to be branded?
yes,
Yeah. Oh my God.
exactly.
It's like how brands are kind of popping on like, oh, we have non-gendered clothing and non-gender makeup. Like, no, just say it's makeup and show everyone wearing it. For me, I want to see because in science fiction, I feel like if I'm reading it and there's not like any like queerness, I'm like, are we not like thousands of years in the future? Why are we like so looking at this through a gender binary? I'd love to see more works where like there's no gender binary, everything's very fluid and no one talks about it because that's how it is.
Right.
Instead of being like, hey, look at how we're doing this cool thing. Look, like it needs to be natural. And same thing with like having a bunch of women just doing stuff because they're there and they're doing it and this has happened.
Yeah. This is a comment about science fiction, but also kind of the movie industry at large, is I would like to see more stuff by like smaller creators. I know that the blockbuster model and the rise of streaming means that we don't often see the kinds of indie movies that would have banked on getting their revenue from DVD sales anymore. But I think that's where the most interesting story comes from, is where, you know, you have one or two people writing a story and it gets out there without being anesthetized by some huge, you know, movie corporation.
Yeah. Right. I think what I would like, there's a lot of things I would love to see. But I think one thing that I would really love to see and something I really loved about these stories is there's something that's like you kind of said, there's something that's like kind of, it's not like made for the public. It's like, I had this idea and it's kind of weird, but like, here it is, you know? And like, I think that's really cool and fun and amazing. And I wish I saw more of that in like present media.
Stop worrying about your audience.
Yeah.
You make your audience.
Right.
And stop reusing the same IP. If I see one more Cinderella story, I'm gonna lose
my
it.
God. No, and it's like my friends, I tell them, oh yeah, I'm a science fiction minor, and they're like, oh yeah, so like Star Wars and Star Trek, and I'm like, no,
Dune?
like,
And I'm like,
no, like there's so many other things. And I also thought that way before getting into this class. I was like, yeah, it's like lasers and ships, but like, no, it's so much more. And I wish all of that was like so much more present in the public eye.
yeah.
That's how it works.
Dr. Yoshinaga laughed at your Cinderella comment. And I did too, because we talked about putting a Cinderella story into this book and then ended up not doing it, right? The Anne McCaffrey story, which was sort of cool novum, but then not a great execution for our purposes. All right, so we are just about at time, but I think we've got to take one more question here. Everyone's agreeing with you on the Cinderella comment, on the Cinderella point. Jake Adler has a question that's on the other side of Dr. Yoshinaga's question. I was wondering how the panelists feel about modern day backlash against the presence or inclusion of women in science fiction. And I don't know how familiar you all are with this. About 5 years ago, there was a huge to-do in the science fiction community, and a really sort of, remember Gamergate? The same sort of fun happened in science fiction, brought to you by the same people. So, you know, women, you know, people encouraging guys to throw acid in feminist face, doxing authors, things like that, trying to get them pushed off ballots. But obviously it didn't really win. You know, it's sort of there, but he wants to know, do you feel like, do you still feel that today in your own experience with science fiction, this sort of debates or kind of backlash against feminism, or not so much? Do you think attitudes about women and creators or characters are becoming retrogressive, or is that just a minority thing?
It kind of depends on the size
Yeah.
of the IP, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
Like you see that a lot in Star Wars. People,
Marvel.
in
Captain Marvel
Marvel,
got huge.
anything that will appeal to quote unquote neckbeards, you are going to get that reaction. Just because it appeals to so many people, you're probably going to get people who think that if any inclusion of a woman where she's not barefoot and pregnant is being political. And to that I say, you know, we've been here longer than you. Mary Shelley
Yeah.
invented science fiction.
Yeah, there's always like, I mean, I've definitely noticed there's a lot of spaces that are much more male dominated that talk about science fiction, like on the internet, on any given like site. There's a lot of men who like come in and are like, well, what do you know? Which is like, I think that's just how some men are. And like, there are great men and allies. And I think that one of the things that I appreciate most from men on the internet is when they are those allies, right? Because like we do have them. And it shouldn't be hard, but for some men, it's really hard to like turn around and be like, a woman knows this better than me. And the ones who do admit that and who are like willing to learn are kind of the ones that I would much rather be hearing from in any space.
Yeah, it's not even that like we're women, it's just we're people.
Oh yeah,
Like
absolutely.
you don't have to
like that
acknowledge,
needs to go away too.
you don't have to acknowledge like this woman knows more than me. You can just say they know more than me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people in general have a problem with being like, oh yes, I was wrong. It sucks to be wrong. Maybe it stings, but I think I definitely agree with the point of like in smaller communities, it's less of an issue.
Yeah.
But I feel like my answer is always defiance and violence. Not always violence, but like if you have the ability to safely and without it affecting you, be an outward spoken minority in a group, do it, because that pulls everybody else along with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, we definitely like, you need the people who benefit from the oppression to be like, hey, this isn't cool, guys, because they're the ones that are usually listened to. But like making yourself forcibly visible, violently visible, unapologetically visible allows you to bring more people into that space. So they feel like, wait, I can carve in a space. Like they've already carved in a little bit of space for me. Let me come in and make more for the rest of us.
Yeah, wasn't it like, not to say like he was the perfect feminist at all, but like wasn't Harlan Ellison, he was very encouraging of Octavia Butler, right?
Yes. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
So it does help when you have people in those spaces that can welcome you in.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, it seems like a great place to end. I know we're at time, and that was sort of a nicely triumphant and positive moment. So again, I want to thank you all. Thank you, team, for being here with me today and spreading the good word about feminist science fiction. And thanks to all of you for being here and listening. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.